Welcome to Water Pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. We are screening live here from Glasgow, and two of us are here physically. Rest of participants who will speak are online. I think that is the new normal, the hybrid kind of work. Now, this session on water and mitigation, from science to climate action, we will deal, what we said, with the role of water in climate action, especially in mitigation. Well, traditionally we think of water has mainly been associated with climate adaptation, since global warming is felt as too much or too little water, droughts or floods. But this perception is changing. We are starting to understand that water is in fact much more important also for mitigation measures than we used to think before. So we are organizing this event together with UNICEF, 50 Litre Home Coalition and Xylem to, well, inform policymakers and practitioners and the decision makers about the role that water can play in also solve the climate crisis. In this session, we will share key insights into the role of water for mitigating climate change, with examples from powerful solutions around the world. And first, I'm very honored to give the floor to the keynote speaker of today, which is Ulrika Modéer, Assistant or UN Assistant Secretary General and Director of Bureau of External Relations and Advocacy at UNDP. So I give the floor to Ulrika Modéer. And I hope soon we will have Ulrika on the screen here in Glasgow, maybe also all over the world. Well, technique is with us for the time being, but I think Ulrika will join us eventually. So let's continue our program without further ado. My institute, or the institute I'm leading, Stockholm International Water Institute, is very active in the generation of new knowledge that, of course, we share with all of colleagues who are interested in what we come through in those research efforts that we are undertaking. And of course, we would like to share that with governments and decision makers, I mentioned before. And one particular field that we are looking into right now is how water can be part of the solution of climate crisis. So next, we will meet Dr. Malin Lundberg Ingemarsson, who is one of our researchers on a joint project on freshwater in climate mitigation that we are conducting together with UNDP SIWI Water Governance Facility and the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, GIZ, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and the Stockholm Resilience Center. And we will also meet another colleague of mine from Stockholm International Water Institute, David Herbert Kuhlman, who is an expert on how countries are implementing water in the nationally determined contributions, the so-called NDCs, to the Paris Agreement. But first, I hand over to Malin. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Torgny. I hope you can hear me well. I just saw Ulrika joining here, so perhaps let's hand over to Ulrika first for the keynote, and then I can follow after. Would that be okay, Ulrika, or you prefer that I go first? It seems like it doesn't work. Okay, so I start by introducing the work that we do then, and then Ulrika hopefully can join afterwards. Let me share my presentation. Okay, so hello all, and many thanks for participating in this event. I will talk a little bit about freshwater's role in mitigating climate change. This is water's important role in reducing global warming. Stockholm International Water Institute has participated in these COPs, the climate conferences, for quite many years now. And together with these partner organizations, we have identified a knowledge gap. That is that in climate mitigation, fresh water is much more important than what most governments are aware of. For example, when it comes to reducing extreme events such as droughts and floods, but also in supporting nature's ability to sequester and store carbon. And together we are now producing a report that will be launched next year. But we have decided to start communicating around this topic already now, since we find it so urgent that policymakers understand the role of fresh water in climate mitigation. And I would say especially from two perspectives, and that is partly that water can provide solutions, but also that for most climate decisions or climate actions, there are implications for water, and they need to be factored in decisions. Last year, GIZ published this report, Stop Floating, Start Swimming. And I would say that it's really a critical step in presenting knowledge about water and climate. And the report has one chapter on mitigation, where they look at direct water mitigation implications. And GIZ estimates that 10% of greenhouse gas emissions can be attributed directly to only 4 areas that are directly related to water. And that is water and wastewater management, peatlands, rice cultivation, and organic matter and nutrients in surface water. And building on the findings of the GIZ report, we are now trying to broaden that scope. Today, there is a focus on technical solutions to reduce emissions. For example, transport, industry, and other energy uses. And those measures are, of course, highly important, but it is not sufficient on its own to look at these measures. In our study, we are identifying high potential as well as high risk mitigation measures or mitigation solutions. We look in water systems and energy systems, but also in different ecosystems. And the main aim of our report is to present leverage points for countries and companies and so on how to take fresh water into consideration in climate strategies. And why do we focus on the measures? In climate action, as you probably know, we need to know which measures or which solutions to invest in. And we have found in our work that most mitigation measures, both the technical and the nature-based, they either require fresh water to be effective, or they influence or modify fresh water, for example, by impacting water quality or by impacting rainfall patterns. So this means that most mitigation measures, they either depend on or are impacted by freshwater. Now, let me hand over to my colleague, David Hibbert-Coleman. He will give us some insights to which water-related mitigation measures that countries are planning for in their NDCs. Please, David.
So next slide, thanks. So yes, as we mentioned in the earlier piece, SIWI, with the support of GIZ and the Water Governance Facility, is carrying out an evaluation of the NDCs, seeing how they've evolved from the first generation to the second generation, or the enhanced phase, and sort of seeing how water has been reflected in it. So at the moment, there's close to 150 enhanced NDCs submitted prior to the COP opening. Our study is predominantly focused on about 100 NDCs from developing state parties. It's quite clear that there is more investment in NDC processes that have been taken as part of the raising of ambition, and that there is increased knowledge about water-related vulnerabilities and risks, and there are more activities, and they have increased markedly between the first iteration of an NDC and the second iteration for most of the enhanced NDCs, whether it's the breadth in terms of the inclusion of the number of sectors around water-related activities, or the depth, which is the knowledge, measures, policies, and targets associated. So we're already seeing that trend around water overall. Next slide, thank you. In terms of mitigation itself, it must be said that the main focus of the water-related measures still tends to be adaptation. However, there is an increased recognition of, water-dominant ecosystems within the NDCs. About 50% of these enhanced NDCs are including that, but the mitigation measures within that remain low. So even though wetlands might be included, still most of the measures were related to adaptation or potentially disaster risk reduction. There has been also a much higher recognition of wastewater systems within the mitigation, with approximately 60% of the NDCs including some measures and some targets associated with that. The blue economy and blue carbon is another trend that is increased from the first iteration to the next, with approximately 35% of coastal parties including blue economy and blue carbon. But interestingly enough, for those countries that have mangrove forests, about 65% of them included mangroves, especially in terms of mitigation as part of that blue carbon. And there is some recognition of greenhouse gas reduction potential within more efficient, say, water efficiency or energy efficiency supply and distribution infrastructure, but overall that is still relatively limited compared to the potential there. And whilst a couple of countries actually noted in their NDCs that whilst they recognise that this could be an issue, they generally include it more within their electricity statistics. So there is a lot of potential for increasing mitigation potential through the water and water-related activities. Next slide, please. With an example being, in this round, the concept of nature-based solutions and the approaches of, ecosystem-based adaptation, etc., has increased markedly. Over about 40% of parties made specific reference to nature-based solutions, but overall, within their thing, they had three main approaches to the way they talked about nature-based solutions. About half of them, it was a generic connection to adaptation and building resilience, in which the nature-based solution was intended to, improve that in order to provide better adaptation and resilience building. Mitigation only was in about 10% of those that referred to nature-based solutions, and then about 40% recognise the co-benefits between mitigation and adaptation. And so you can sort of see that there is, 50% are sort of seeing these nature-based solutions as part of their emissions reduction profiles, but there's still a long way to go. And this is, of course, within these particular countries that referred to nature-based solutions in their texts. And most of the activities, going back to what Malin was saying, whether it was technological or nature-based, these were about the protection, maintenance, and enhancement of ecosystems and ecosystem services. In addition, disaster risk reduction featured in approximately 30% of these NDCs connected to nature-based solutions. And that's within the limited time. Let's just give you a bit of a flavour of a report that will be prepared and published hopefully by the end of this year that talks a lot more about how the NDCs are evolving and how water has been included. So I will pass that back to Torgny. So thank you for listening.
And David, for sharing these most interesting facts and figures and also findings that you have about both mitigation measures but also what NDCs are all about when it comes to water. And with that, I now leave the floor. I hope we have Ulrika Modéer, UN Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Bureau of External Relations and Advocacy at UNDP. So please, Ulrika, you have the floor and the screen.
Thank you so much, Torgny, and sorry for being late. I had too little time between meetings and it took some time to navigate. But really also interesting to have the possibility to dive in and to listen to the start of this meeting. And it's really encouraging, I must say, also UNDP, and I will share that also, has accompanied more than 120 member states as they have developed their NDCs. I believe in these times when we will hear that there is a gap and that we really have to mind this gap with regard to the emission reductions, we also need to see the quality of the NDCs that has been explained and the potential that is still there. Because certainly we know climate change is upon us. I don't need to explain that to anyone in this room, and it threatens our supply systems and our very existence. And I believe also, of course, this seminar is important, and what you're discussing as SIWI is incredibly important with your partners, because water is really the medium through which we feel most of its impacts. And that gives also water, I think, really the attention should be much more into what we're discussing here today and what you and your partners work with, also UNDP being one of them. Adding energy to the hydrological cycle, global warming makes rainfall more variable and unpredictable, as we know, and storms more intense and floods more devastating. And at the same time, we know and we see that droughts have more frequency and they are more prolonged. So already today, half of the humanity, 4 billion people, they face severe water scarcity for at least 1 month per year. And this, of course, has knock-on effects on ecosystems, on livelihoods, and the fulfillment of basic human needs and basic human rights. And we also know, and I think that this is very much the discussion taking place in COP as well, and leading up to COP, that people in poverty are disproportionately affected by all these disasters, even though they have not been the ones to make this problem occur. So addressing multidimensional poverty is one of the most direct ways that we can reduce climate change and vulnerability. And this is very much the approach of UNDP, as well as we have a broad mandate and the ability to really accompany countries and communities with system solutions. Important priorities include access to robust water and sanitation services. Nearly 800 million people, most of them in rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa, as we know, also lack basic water services. And this, of course, warrants a special priority. And I hope that this is also being discussed in many seminars, not only this one. But to address water and climate challenges, we must bring both issues to the same table. And I think that this is what we're calling for, to have a system approach to what we do. It's really a great pleasure to listen into the discussions. And I hope to accompany more of the discussions that you're having also in the Water and Climate Pavilion, because I really want to commend SIWI and the organizing team and the partners here for bringing water into the climate discussions the way that you do. And as we also heard David and Malin share here in the beginning of this seminar, as a possibility actually to move forward, both with regard to mitigation and adaptation. According, and you all know the report, the latest report of the UNFCCC, countries are now committing to important greenhouse gas emissions and climate neutrality goals. But of course, as we look at all the NDCs taken together, we see a combined increase for about 16% of the emissions anticipated. And you've all seen the headings in papers. You're accompanying this so closely. So, of course, heading towards 2.7 degrees is important to have as headlines, because I think the wider audiences out there, they need to understand how serious the situation is. But at the same time, really, we have a lot of opportunities to decarbonize our economies in the energy transitions to sustainable energy resources. And while reducing overall energy demand, which is also important to discuss, we also can do a lot of important things. Scaling up solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources are, of course, very important. Hydropower is the most used renewable energy, as we know, and accounting for more than 60% of renewable energy generation. And the International Energy Agency forecasts a 3% annual increase in hydropower. net new installed capacity until 2030. And this is where we must start to think about water role in climate change mitigation efforts, the topic of this event. Because in many countries, climate change is already reducing river flows, and even lower dry season flows are to be expected, increasing competition for water, as we know, including higher evaporation in a warmer climate, impacts on water availability, and the capacities for hydropower generation will also be part of the challenges that we're facing. Other renewables, biofuels, they also depend, as we know, on the availability of water, and water managing, including critical water allocation decisions, can be really a critical determinant of the success or not of these mitigation plans that are being discussed throughout this week. Water is, and everyone here on this call knows this, really critical for carbon sequestration. Most wetlands constitute net carbon sinks, as we know, and especially peatlands, covering 3% of the Earth's land surface, but they contain nearly 1/3 of the land-based carbon. And the carbon storage in peatlands is dependent on the water table and the vegetation cover. So I think that this is also something that we and UNDP would like also to make sure that we can put at the forefront some of these issues that are not so well known, but should be known as wider audiences try to understand what can be done and where are the opportunities as well, but also the risks. And on top of this, of course, the direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions of the water sector itself. We know water and wastewater utilities was mentioned are estimated to account for between 3% and 7% of the global emissions. And this involves also carbon dioxide emissions from energy and used for pumping water and air water production and treatment, as well as methane emissions from wastewater. And methane emissions, they can be lowered by effective treatment processes and by collecting and treating a larger portion of organic wastes. And waste management is also important for other planetary boundaries, as we know, nutrient pollution emanating from excesses of fertilizers that are not taken up by plants in the fields, can overload water bodies and deplete oxygen to the extent that the aquatic life is also destroyed. So it really speaks to the importance of this system approach that we are continuously alluding to. The crisis stands by exacerbated by climate change through more extreme rainfall events and ongoing deoxygenation of the oceans as well. And climate change and pollution, they also threaten freshwater biodiversity and ecosystem contained in lakes, in rivers and wetlands, and they are being lost at a higher rate than any of the other ecosystems. And I think that this is also a fact that is not that well known. Almost 1/3 of freshwater species face extinction due to habitat loss, alien species pollution, or over-harvesting. So now, UNDP and partners like Global Environmental Facility, GEF, we are currently applying ecosystem-based approaches in 27 shared rivers, lakes, and aquifers. And this makes us the world's largest provider of transboundary water management solutions. And we also work with SIWI and many other partners with us here today to assist countries to really consider these water interactions more systematically in their climate plans. And as I said in the beginning, UNDP made a climate promise. We already had support to about 50 countries a couple of years back. And in 2019, as we had the climate summit in New York, we said, why don't we then use our worldwide network and our broad partnerships to make a promise that we can actually support even more countries? And now 120 member states and counting are looking for support to develop their NDCs. And we are, of course, looking at already now how to move from pledge to impact. And here's, of course, where the discussions taking place here today can be incredibly important and also inspiring. Because I truly believe, and just to finalize, Torgny, that we should be really concerned about what we see with regard to lack of commitments. But at the same time, and I think that this was also what we heard here in the beginning, the quality of the plans, the ownership, how we can actually start to see if we can have a whole of government, whole of society approach, integrate these plans into budget processes, into important planning processes, will be key to see if we can actually deliver. And once we see that there are opportunities that comes with these plans, we believe that we can make change happen and we can have really positive scale-up effects. I just wanted also to just do a heads up. If you haven't yet seen the dinosaur coming on your screen. Look for UNDP's campaign, Don't Choose Extinction. We are really, and I've mentioned this throughout the introductory comments here, looking at how to bring some of these quite technical but also promising discussions to wider audiences. There are solutions out there. Politicians are making choices on our behalf and on coming generations' behalf. So look at our campaign that tries to bring program policy and advocacy into a global discussion about fossil fuel subsidies, but we would be happy to discuss also onwards on these platforms, also water as a key solution to some of the problems that we are facing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ulrika, and thank you for your engagement. I see that UNDP is on top of what we're discussing today and also sharing not only challenges but also opportunities and potential for the future. And I also will refer to what you mentioned about the system approach. That cannot be underscored enough. Thanks a lot. Now, I will turn to another UN organization, UNICEF, and we have Sylvia Gaia with us here in Glasgow today, and you are Senior Advisor for Water and Environment at UNICEF headquarters, and you will introduce to us some videos from some country experience on how water and sanitation hygiene sector can address these issues. So over to you, Sylvia.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for being here today with us. We are going to now, we have here a lot of the data that Malin and David and all the colleagues have presented about the key potential of the water sector into the reduction of carbon emissions. But I wanted to do a little bit of a zoom in the wash sector, because this is one of the sectors that presents a lot of potential inside the big water sector. And that's why we believe that this wash sector should be at the top of the climate priority agenda. So we are going to share with you today 3 examples from Ukraine, Iraq and Jordan, to just give you a sense of the range, scales and enormous potential of the wash sector to reduce carbon emissions. And this is just picked from a lot of experiences that are happening right now in a lot of countries, not only rich countries, but also middle-income countries and low-income countries. And this has a lot of value. So these experiences, while they, of course, reduce carbon emissions, you will see that they also contribute to the conservation of the limited water resources that we have that are increasingly being very scarce. And importantly, they contribute also to the sustainability of the critical water services that the population needs, which is an increasing challenge with the impacts that we are having on climate change. So you are going to see now the 3 experiences on your screens. Thank you.
In Ukraine, major achievements in water and energy efficiency have been made through hydraulic modeling of the water network and a review of the asset management system. This approach has helped to identify sections of the water network that were leaking. When the leaking sections are identified, they are replaced. The replacement of these sections reduces the greenhouse emissions of the water network and the associated energy and operational costs. Importantly, replacement of the leaking section also reduces the amount of water that needs to be abstracted and reduces the risk of contamination along damaged sections of the network, which contributes to a safer and sustainable water service. In Iraq, increasingly high temperatures and growing demand for power put intense pressure on the power grid, particularly during the periods of peak demand during the summer months. This can cause severe service interruptions, including disruptions to the distribution of water and the treatment of wastewater. Due to the unreliability of many of these services, particularly in rural areas, many systems rely on backup generators, leading to an increase in greenhouse emissions. By transitioning to solar power for water systems, the emissions are reduced, and this also leads to a more consistent and predictable water service. This is particularly important during periods of extreme heat, ensuring that water services can be sustained to the most vulnerable.
الألواح الشمسية كان أكو قبل يعني ما كان تجي الماء والكهرباء والغاز بسبب الألواح الشمسية قام تجي الماء بشكل مستمر وإن شاء الله تدوم هاي الحالة.
In Jordan, an innovative approach uses solar power to treat wastewater from mosques and schools, producing treated water which is reused for irrigation. The reuse of the water ensures that the wastewater has been treated safely, which reduces emissions. Importantly, the reuse of water for irrigation purposes reduces the volume of water which needs to be abstracted for agricultural purposes, which is one of the largest users of water in Jordan. This is particularly important in Jordan because it is one of the most water-scarce countries in the world. Other positives of this approach include the generation of much-needed additional income for the school when the excess solar power is sold to the national grid, as well as the establishment of environmental clubs in the schools. These clubs reinforce messages on the value of water and the importance of conserving it to influence the behavior of future generations of children in Jordan.
Thank you for sharing these interesting examples from around the world. They really demonstrate how fundamental water is for all aspects of our societies. And that is something that we're going to deep into right now in the next segment of our session here today. First, we will hear about the 50-liter Home Coalition, a global action-oriented multi-stakeholder platform that brings together private and public organizations to address two of the world's most imminent and challenging issues, water security and climate change. So I would now like to welcome Ratish Nambothiri, Director for Innovation for Good and Sustainability at Kohler Company. So please, Ratish, you have the floor.
Thank you, Torgny. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really privileged to be here representing the 50-liter Home Coalition and Kohler Company. A fantastic event and a lot of comments being made that truly resonate with how we're approaching the water issue with the 50-liter Coalition. So let me start by talking about what is the coalition. So the 50-liter Home Coalition is a global platform that brings the public and the private sector together. And the goal is really to address two of the most pressing global challenges that we've all been talking about: water security and climate change. And really the goal of the coalition remains to bring innovations to market and scale them that can help consumers reduce their residential water consumption down to 50 liters per person per day at net zero carbon. And just for context, if you look at an average American home today, you're probably talking about over 200 liters per person per day of water usage on a normal daily basis. So it's a pretty significant reduction from where we're today. And one of the other important factors of this coalition is we want to deliver 50 liters without actually feeling like a compromise. And that's going to be the true challenge, right? We want to deliver 50 liters that actually feels like 500 liters. And that's where true innovation comes in. And as you can see from the slide here, thank you for sharing. This coalition really is cross-sectoral, right? So if you think about, we've got global industry leaders across the private sector, the public sector, and also a variety of different civil society organizations that are really coming together, focused around reinventing the future of water and truly changing the narrative on domestic water consumption and its true connection and relationship with carbon emissions. One of the things we've all been hearing about today, and we heard Ulrika talk about that too, was water and GHG emissions and its connection with water. So we call it the water energy nexus. One of the key innovation topics for the coalition is the water energy nexus. And let me explain to you what that means and what we're focused on. There are many studies that have documented what is the impact of climate change on depleting water resources, and I think that is fairly well known. But what is not quite out there, published, effectively enough, is the connection between residential water usage or domestic water usage inside someone's homes and the impact that can have on mitigating climate change externally, right? That's the connection we're trying to explore as part of the water energy nexus. And in simple words, what we really need to understand, and what we're trying to understand through the coalition's work, is what happens inside our homes from a water usage standpoint, and across our kitchen and bathrooms, and how much water and how much energy is used truly across our kitchens and bathrooms to treat, transport, and store and deliver the water for different applications within the home. And that's really what we're trying to understand and optimize. Our research has confirmed that the water-related energy in the form of hot water really accounts for over 6% of carbon emissions in some of the largest cities around the world. And that makes it the second biggest source of energy consumption in homes after space heating. So, that really tells us that that is a key area of focus. And the 50 Liter Coalition believes that we need to bring innovations to market that not only help conserve water, but also help conserve energy. And all of that without compromising on an amazing consumer experience. Because at the end of the day, for us to be able to drive adoption and scale of these solutions, it cannot be perceived as a compromise or a trade-off by the consumer. And finally, I'll speak a little bit about why a company like Kohler is participating in the coalition and what we bring to the table. So, for those of you who don't know much about Kohler Company, we're a leader in the design and manufacturing of kitchen and bath plumbing products. And, we've done this, we've been in this space for over 145 years. So we really know a lot about water and how to design for water, how to design solutions and experiences that offer that gracious water delivery to consumers. And we're also very keenly aware of the water crisis and truly understand our responsibility as a company to reduce not only our own water use across our operations, but also help our consumers reduce their own water usage. And that was one of the primary reasons we became a founding member, one of the founding members of the 50 Liter Coalition, along with all the other partners that you saw in that previous slide. In terms of innovation, I'll end with this. I want to give you a flavor for what sort of innovations are needed to get us to 50 liters. And I'll highlight two kinds of innovations: ones that exist in the market today versus the ones that do not and need to be considered. Let me start by the ones that exist in the market today. We have Kohler has hundreds of plumbing products that are certified to carry what's called the WaterSense label. The WaterSense partnership is something that we pursue with the United States EPA. And this, we've had this partnership for over 12 years now, and this is something that has helped us develop products that have saved over 290 billion gallons of water in across North America through our products, and over 7.3 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So again, solutions, these are water and energy efficient plumbing fixtures that are in the market today that you can purchase that offer a great experience, do not have to compromise on functionality, but also help you significantly reduce your water footprint. But the unfortunate reality is these solutions are not going to get us to 50 liters. These solutions may get us to about half the way there. So how do we close the gap between the other half? And that's where we truly need transformative innovation and new sort of step change in water solutions that really help us rethink how water is used and delivered and perhaps even reused within the home. And that's what we're focused on as part of the 50 Liter Coalition. To achieve these innovations, as an example, Kohler Company, at Kohler, we're leveraging one of our in-house innovation incubators called Innovation for Good. It's a team that I lead that really gives our associates an opportunity to bring innovations to market that have a social purpose. And over the past few years, we introduced a platform called iPrize, which really is sort of an innovation competition that allows associates to pitch innovations, and then we pick the most promising ones and kind of help them further develop and bring them to market. And the reason I bring that up is this year's focus for the iPrize challenge is really greenhouse gas emissions. So we're focused and we're challenging our associates to bring innovations to surface that actually have a positive impact from a greenhouse gas emission reduction perspective. The technology innovations are just one piece of it. We really need to drive innovations in the space of policy and regulatory environments as well. So we need to have policy frameworks that allow and incentivize consumers to use these kinds of products and save water and save energy. And that's what the coalition is also going to help do. We intend to work, the coalition intends to take these technological solutions and innovations and pilot these in different parts of the world over the next few years to test the feasibility and also understand the consumer acceptance and really use all of those insights to bring something to market and then scale them across cities to deliver 50 liters per person per day, making it an irresistible experience without compromising on the functionality. So if you guys are interested in knowing more about the coalition or the work we're doing, feel free to reach out to us. We're also going to be launching a white paper soon, which will talk about the water energy nexus that I just talked about in reference. And we'll give you some insights on what is the connection between indoor residential water usage and the energy emissions associated with it, and some innovation ideas for how we can reduce that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Radesh, and that was really interesting. I think it's a great coalition you have there in your both what you mentioned about innovation, but also the approach to the future. We're a bit running a little late, but don't worry. If we do overrun by 5 minutes, if we can find something for the future, that is the better for the world. So we will continue. Next, we have Austin Alexander from Xylem, who will present Water's Race to Zero and inform us on the water sector's collective greenhouse gas emissions impact. So over to you, Austin. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Tori. Thank you to SIWI in particular, and Malin, who you previously heard from, for coordinating today's session. Fabulous to be part of this group. My name is Austin Alexander. I lead sustainability and social impact for Xylem. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a global water technology company. We have about 16,000 employees operating in 150 countries. And core to serving the water sector, sustainability is at center of what we do. And to serve the water sector in particular, including the water and wastewater utilities and industrial users of water, it's an important piece of who we are as an organization and who we are as a sector. And while I'm here representing Xylem, I'm very proud to also represent a bit of a motley crew that has been working throughout 2021 in interest of measuring, tracking, and celebrating the water and wastewater utilities sector and their race to zero. So special thanks to CDP, Water UK, US Water Alliance, GWI, and many, many other acronyms. So Xylem, we recently made our own net zero commitment. And as a sustainability practitioner, I'll tell you firsthand, it's not easy. It takes a lot of work to appropriately assess, catalog, and measure a baseline target and appropriately set a measured, balanced, and yet ambitious goal. Doing net zero in a credible and meaningful way takes work. And the hardest first step is making that commitment. But as a sector, we need to move. And recent studies have found that greenhouse gas emissions associated with water use and management are close to 10% of the total greenhouse gas emissions around the globe. Additionally, the water and wastewater utilities themselves account for approximately 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And a perspective I like to use, we've referenced here, is that's equivalent to the entire shipping industry. Inherent in who we are as a sector is that we pride ourselves on being a sustainable sector, providing clean, safe, and reliable drinking water, and protecting our environment by treating wastewater means that sustainability is who water is. Contrasting this with our fairly staggering statistics I just referenced seems unnatural for us as a sector. Make no mistake, it takes a lot of energy to treat and provide these critical services. Additionally, if we are truly out to set achieving SDG 6, and I loved having Sylvia present here today on some of the WASH work that UNICEF does, we should expect that energy required using today's technology and methods will expand that greenhouse gas emissions further. So on the surface, we have a dilemma. On one hand, we absolutely must expand drinking water and sanitation services to the billions of people who do not have reliable and safe access today. But on the other hand, using many of today's technology, exists energy required to expand these services and move and treat water in a changing climate environment will only increase the energy required and associated greenhouse gas emissions of our sector. And perhaps many of you have been to water or wastewater treatment plants before. I truly love visiting wastewater treatment plants. It's visiting one in college is why I chose this career path. But whether you're in California, you're in China, Paris, or Glasgow, these plants probably look quite similar to each other. And if you go back through the previous decades, they probably look quite similar as they do today. And that's for good reason. It's a sector that wants to be consistent and reliable and provide services for the communities in which they serve. But the good news, which I'm here to share today, is that we don't need to wait to get started. So much of the technology required exists today and is ready to go. So I like to think of two areas that immediate improvement in which we can do right now, and that is to commit and to cut. So the first step is always the hardest, but making a commitment is so important. And as a sector, we must together take this first step to committing to ourselves, each other, and the communities we serve, that the water sector is going to zero. And it only works if every single one of us, the utilities, technology providers like ourselves, and other partners in the sector, to set ambitious targets of net zero commitments. And then immediately, starting today, we can make the first steps in reducing the overall energy required to treat and move water. This is primed and ready to go. To give you a stat from an upcoming white paper from Xylem, almost 50% of wastewater sector electricity emissions can be readily abated with existing technologies. And they can do that 50% cut with approximately 95% of the impact achievable at zero or negative cost. 95% of those actions can either keep you the same or save you money. This potential volume of negative cost abatement is approximately 44 metric tons of CO2 equivalent annually. The energy efficiency opportunities can unlock substantial abatement under current market conditions using available technology that exists today. Simple changes to things like pumping systems, adaptive mixers, variable speed drives, and real-time decision support. Additionally, for the water utilities, remote asset management and technology like advanced meter infrastructure means utilities can monitor individual water meters remotely. No longer do you need to drive every single block through town to read a meter. These changes are holding manufacturers like ourselves as Xylem to task to make these improvements quickly, efficiently, and brought to market. And as we look to the future, I think there's three areas in which we all can focus on. The first is to decentralize. It's time for us to look at options for decentralized services as a complement to today's technology. I love the examples from Sylvia. Again, I think those were fantastic ways to address and serve rural and remote populations underserved today. We need to rethink today's technology to do so. And there are many startups out there trying out new decentralized technologies that can help with the energy requirements and reduced footprint, complementing today's existing infrastructure. Second, digest. Wastewater treatment plants are fantastic tools in themselves. We have ready to go, take home, put in the oven, pizzas that we can put in of renewable power plants. How amazing is that? We have more often will cover the energy requirements to run the plant and surrounding operations using the energy produced by the treatment processes. In many cases, this can be sold back to the grid. And utilities are doing that today, such as East Bay Mud in California. For them, this is old news, as they produce more energy than they need, selling back to their local utility. Complementing this with other renewable sources, treatment facilities could be a nice complement to load balancing and a major challenge as we move forward in a renewable grid. And finally, go digital. Every other aspect of our life has been made more efficient by digital capabilities. I can find out just about everything I need to know and do right here on my cell phone. And when you have better data, you make better decisions. And it's time for us to make that data visible for utility operators, as well as the public. And these advances can make existing infrastructure more efficient, require less capital investments, and provide real-time solutions to everyday challenges like mitigating the energy use and greenhouse gases. That technology is ready to go today. But the best news, and my favorite part of being in the water sector, is that we are close. We're a family. We're cheering each other on, no matter what role you play. And each of us don't have to go it alone in our race to zero. And as we have brave and inspiring utility partners out there to look up to, shining the light ahead for all of us, thanks to the work with our friends over at GWI, Global Water Intelligence, we know that at least 65 major utilities have made net zero commitments, which accounts for a served population of approximately 185 million. GWI has graciously posted this living list on their website, and I highly encourage you to check it out. It'll give you a flavor that these commitments are not isolated to specific geographic regions. Although I will highlight Water UK is making considerable strides in leadership today. But utilities include those like Aguas Andinas in Chile, Sydney Water in Australia, the PUB in Singapore, Metro Water District in Los Angeles. It spans the globe. All over the world, this sector, including utilities and other industrial users of water, are joining the race to zero. It's not easy, but you don't need to go it alone. And if you're out there waiting for someone else to go first, wait no longer. It's your time now. Follow the footsteps of some of these fantastic utilities. Water is here to be in the climate conversation, and water is not waiting for others to make these goals for us. We as a sector and the utilities in which many of us serve all over the world are taking this upon themselves to stand up and take action. So please join us. You have an entire community waiting to support you. We're all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. And we should definitely give credit to the utilities that already have made a net zero commitment. And of course, we would like also to call on others, both corporation utilities, to follow after to make their own commitments. Now we are soon coming to a panel, but before that we have some more videos. But even before that, it's a great pleasure for me now to invite John Lane, who is chair of the Scientific Program Committee at SIWI World Water Week, and James Dalton, who is the Global Water from the Global Water Program at IUCN, to tell us about the Water Initiative for Net Zero. So I guess we start with John Lane. You have the video, I think, so I hope it works. Over to John. We give it another try. You can read the subtitles, but of course we would like to hear the voice of John Lane also, but let's start it all over again. This is live screening, always challenges, but we will make it.
Hi, Torgny. I'm not sure if you hear me. I will try from this side instead. Give me a second.
Humankind's million-year journey on this precious, fragile planet is severely threatened by the biggest problem that we have ever faced: global heating. This is a problem that we ourselves have caused. Humans are destroying our only home by pumping vast quantities of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and cooking the planet. This problem of global heating is so huge and so urgent that everybody in all walks of life must help to solve it. I'm John Lane, and I work in water. In recent months, while listening to the debate on climate change, I've noticed that government and business leaders talk about preventing climate change by reducing emissions, whereas many water people talk more about adapting to the climate change rather than preventing it. But I thought, surely we must be doing good work on water that can reduce emissions. So I spoke to a number of people working in water and mitigation, and they said, yes, we do, but we're not doing well enough at communicating our messages to the political and public arena. So we have formed WINS, the Water Initiative for Net Zero, to do that. WINS is uniting as many as possible of the organisations and voices working in water to bring their experiences and their insights to help governments and industries to achieve net zero through water solutions. Here's how it works. We're not putting our hand out to ask for more money or to plead that our sector is somehow special. We're offering water as a tool for others to achieve their aims. We're communicating messages from water professionals and scientists into the political and media world. All of our messages are positive and helpful and based on good science. We've drafted a list of the 6 main water-related activities that can reduce global heating. They are reducing greenhouse gas emissions from rice paddies, increasing carbon storage and reducing methane emissions from wetlands and peatlands, reducing methane emissions from human excreta, reducing CO2 emissions from power generation, reducing the energy consumption and the greenhouse gas emissions from water services and water supply, and reducing the power consumption and greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. My colleague James Dalton will be mentioning more about all these in a minute. WINS is a global movement. It's a channel for everybody to communicate these positive messages about the role of water in reducing emissions. But we're not starting a new organisation to do the communicating. That's for everybody to do. WINS is not an organisation. It has no formalities, no staff, no money. I see it as a song sheet from which everybody can be singing the same songs. Right now, we're hoping to attract as many people as possible to join us. Together, we will communicate our positive messages to the decision makers, either directly or through the amplification of the media. But the messages are not the end point of our work. That end point will only be achieved when the messages lead to decisions and actions that really do reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This will take some years. We're excited to be launching WINS here at COP26, and we hope that WINS will contribute to the historic efforts of the whole of humankind to prevent global heating. Thank you.
James Dalton.
And now James Dalton should be on the screen in a second.
Thank you. Can you see me?
I cannot
yeah,
see
great, excellent.
Good, go ahead.
Excellent, thank you very much. Thanks to John for the video introducing WINS, and thank you to everyone online and in person who is joining this launch event for WINS. I'd like to end this part of the session with a few messages really targeted to three main groups of people. One, messages to colleagues who work in water with us. Please join us and lend your voice to this growing movement for the Water Initiative for Net Zero. Please send us your latest work and scientific findings and knowledge on how water can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And please use our set of key messages in your own communications. Any organization, network, or individual can join this movement. WINS offers a politically compelling umbrella and an advocacy brand that we want to grow using a coherent set of clear messages that you can use, that anyone can use, but backed by robust evidence from respected scientific sources. WINS works basically on these three main stages through using and identifying good science, through summarizing that into clear key messages, and then communicating them to politicians, to media, to decision makers, to investors as to what can be done and what should be done. And you're welcome as a water colleague to help us with any of those stages. The second group of people is to the media. Please help us to grow and promulgate positive, helpful messages about the contribution that water management and water can make to reducing emissions. There are lots of people clamoring for the attention of decision makers. So we need the help of media and communication experts to project our voices to them and our development of the work in water into the broader context of climate change mitigation work. Thirdly, our message to political, business and financial leaders and decision makers is that water management is a tool to help you to achieve your targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to help prevent global heating. Please make use of the science that's available, the knowledge and the experience within the water community of practice at large to unlock the benefits of water solutions for net zero emissions. John already mentioned briefly some 6 key areas that we've identified over the course of developing WINS that would actually have the greatest impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Reducing emissions from rice paddies is a key activity that needs to be considered and better understood within broader agricultural frameworks. Increasing carbon capture and reducing methane emissions from wetlands and peatlands is critical. We heard this in the keynote speech earlier on. Wetlands and especially peatlands remove and capture even more carbon from the atmosphere than forests do, but they can also emit methane if they are not well managed, if they are degraded, if they are drained, or if they are flooded. So better water and soil management is key to harness the power of our best allies in reducing emissions are natural systems. We must also look to reduce emissions from human waste, something that John mentioned earlier on, has been mentioned also by others, including Austin from Xylem. We must also work to reduce CO2 emissions from power generation, and we must use our existing global hydropower fleet far more strategically to allow renewable energies such as solar and wind into the energy grid, rather than developing more and more hydropower opportunities. We must look at what we've got first and use that far better than we are doing. We must work to reduce emissions from water supply. Xylem again mentioned this. Water is heavy, water is bulky, it takes a lot of energy to clean it. The cleaner we have our freshwater systems and the easier that we recapture energy in moving water around the planet, the better we can reduce the emissions from those systems. And finally, reducing energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions involved in agriculture. Adopting smart management of water for agriculture can reduce energy needs, increase the carbon storage in soils, improve water retention, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Looking to new tools in the right place at the right time, such as solar-powered irrigation. These can work alongside reforestation, agroforestry, and other activities that can improve soil conditions and increase the carbon storage on degraded lands. While not all of these actions can apply everywhere, every action at every scale, from local to global, contributes to net zero efforts and to the Sustainable Development Goals more broadly. Let's look for both the big wins and the small wins in all aspects of our work. In conclusion, the founding members of WINS are a wide range of institutions and individuals associated with water, and we're all acting on a voluntary basis. But we've formed WINS because we want our grandchildren to live happy, safe, healthy lives, and we want the same for everybody else's grandchildren too. WINS is a global public good with no national, political, or religious affiliation, and exists for all the people in the world and your descendants. We welcome you and offer you collaboration and solidarity and a sense of purpose and hope in the work that we're trying to achieve. If we can prevent global heating, then people themselves, other species, and the planet will have a more viable future. We all have a stake in this future, and we all have a role in achieving it. So finally, please seize the moment, join the movement, and let us achieve more together. More information about WINS can be found on the website and by emailing the email address that you see on your screen. But this is a call to action, but it's our action. Let's not expect others to reform without us reforming first, understanding and learning the lessons collaboratively with others and sharing that experience on to ensure that we try and achieve more as a global community of practice and integrate water into global mitigation success. Thank you very much. Back to you, Torgny.
Initiative for net zero, a winning concept, I will claim. Now, it's a great pleasure for me once again to welcome back on stage Silvia Gaia to will introduce some new video recordings from around the world. Please, Silvia.
Thanks a lot again. And as we showed before, the water and sanitation sector can greatly contribute to reduce the carbon emissions through the water supply. But now we are going to showcase how we can also reduce carbon emissions and methane through wastewater and sanitation systems, because they indeed contribute to have an impact in the sense that they need a lot of energy and a lot of intensity in this energy for the water treatment and for the distribution systems. And therefore is a sector that contributes to the emissions. So we are going to have some examples to showcase how this can be reversed. According to the environmental agency here in the UK, the water sector contributes to as much as 5.5% of greenhouse gas emissions, and this percentage is likely to be higher in developing countries because the efficiency of the systems is not the same. So for that, they do energy audits of utilities because they are very good instruments to identify inefficiencies and invest in technologies that reduce the carbon footprint. So one of those technologies is the recovery of methane generated by human faces to produce biogas. So in the following two examples, we will see two applications of biogas, and I think that Austin was making reference a lot about the digesters, so she was a very good introduction for this. And I hope that both Jon and James will like the examples on how this biogas is recovered through the sanitation sector. So the first example comes from Johannesburg wastewater treatment plant in South Africa. And they have been able to reduce their emissions by 15%, but they aim to reduce it up to 50%. Other plants around the world have been able to even go carbon neutral or dramatically reduce their energy bills by just using biogas recovery. So the second example showcases the same technology, biogas, but applied to rural areas in Vietnam. Through a successful national biogas program that benefits almost 1 million people and reduces 1.1 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So that program benefits from carbon credits to continue the scale up of these programs, and it contributes to the long-term sustainability. We have picked this great example from SMB because you will see the expansion, the scale of the project, and also the fact that they are, because this project is done at household levels in rural areas, the families are mixing the livestock excreta with human excreta to make the biogas more productive. So thank you very much. Let's put the videos.
This is the unlikely source of South Africa's future energy. This massive sewage pipe runs through northern Johannesburg. Here, at this wastewater treatment plant, that sewage is turned into energy in the form of biogas. Plant engineers say electricity price hikes in South Africa push them to look into generating their own power. This facility produces methane gas that powers about 15% of the plant's electricity needs. Engineers hope to add more facilities to get to 50%. Biogas is fuel created by the fermentation of organic material, like animal and human waste. It's an age-old technology that has come back into fashion. Engineer Peter Lowe says South Africa has about 300 biogas-producing facilities, from home setups to large factories. Those facilities largely use the energy for their own needs.
Biogas it's energy, life energy, and we thought let's use it, let's enhance it, clean it, and put it back into use so that we can then obviously improve life, the quality of life.
Vietnam Biogas Program. A look back after 17 years. The household's livestock farming model poses a pollution risk to water sources, groundwater, air, land, and agricultural products. The greenhouse effect leads to warming. People's respiratory and digestive health is affected. In 2003, the biogas program for animal husbandry sector in Vietnam was established and implemented by the Department of Livestock Production under the Ministry of Agricultural and Rural Development in partnership with the Netherlands Development Organization SMB. By treating livestock waste, clean and affordable energy is provided to local people, protecting the health of farmers, supporting the local economy, and preserving the environment while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The biogas program in Vietnam has evolved over the last 17 years throughout 3 phases. From piloting, disseminating, and expanding, to market-based development and the issuance of carbon credits that enable the financial sustainability of the project, the biogas program has installed over 180,000 biogas plants in 53 provinces. A key innovative component of this program has been the issuance and commercialization of carbon credits generated by these biodigesters to ensure the financial sustainability of the project. With 3,072,000 carbon credits issued, creating a turnover of over $7 million.
Chính vì thế mà việc dự án phát hành cũng như là đăng ký thành công cũng như là thương mại hóa được 3 triệu tín chỉ đến bây giờ, và đến bây giờ thì hơn 3 triệu tín chỉ chúng tôi đã bán gọi là gần như hết, chỉ còn có hơn 100.000 tín chỉ nữa thôi, thì cho thấy rằng chúng tôi đã rất thành công trong cái việc gọi là đăng ký cũng như là thương mại hóa cái tín chỉ carbon và cạnh tranh với lại các cái tổ chức và các cái công ty quốc tế để thu hút được cái nguồn vốn về cho Việt Nam.
the biogas program for animal husbandry sector of Vietnam, a program that creates clean and renewable energy, a program that improves the environment, a program that contributes to the health improvement and a safer society.
And what's truly remarkable about this program is all the different benefits that come from it, not just environmental and farm productivity, but sanitation as well. More than 60% of the biogas owners are connecting their toilets to the biogas system. So in that respect, health impacts have been extremely positive and overall just a fantastic benefit to the community.
The application of biogas technology in livestock production contributes to the successful implementation of targeted national programs on new rural areas, following the implementation of Vietnam's NDC commitments and its plan of green growth for the agricultural sector. A bright and new look for Vietnam's countryside.
Thanks a lot, Sylvia and UNICEF, for sharing these valuable contributions from experience and real-time experience, real-life experience, I would claim, from South Africa and Vietnam. Now, coming to the final segment on our session or this event on water mitigation from science to climate action. We have invited some experts from outside the water sector to address issues that we have been discussing now for, well, an hour and 15 minutes about water and mitigation. And I'm soon going to introduce our three partners taking part in this final part of our discussion. And I will pose two questions, one at a go. First one question, and I'll get some responses from the three participants, and then another question before we wrap up. So the participants are Morgan Richmond from Climate Policy Initiative on climate finance, his specialty. We have on climate finance also Hubert Jennett, Senior Infrastructure Advisors Green Climate Fund. And from public sector, Paula Kehoe from San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and chair of the US Blue Ribbon Commission. And my first question to all of you, and I give you some 2, maybe 3 minutes, but to respond to is, please comment on the development and develop your thinking around water and mitigation from your point of view and what you heard today. So I start with Paula, please. Your comments on what you have heard and on water mitigation.
Thank you. The San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, we are a municipal public agency and we provide 3 utility services, water, sanitation, and power. So we provide significant services to our community. And for decades, San Francisco has created and implemented policies and engaging frameworks to reduce emissions citywide. For example, since 1990, the city has achieved a 41% reduction in emissions. And really, that's been primarily driven by our clean electrical grid. We generate hydroelectric power. And we also have improved energy codes and citywide energy efficiency. We are planning and updating our climate action plan. So we are aiming to achieve a net zero greenhouse gas by 2040 citywide. And we're addressing that by looking at racial and social equity, public health, economic recovery, and resiliency. But when it comes to water in particular, obviously many utilities around the world share a similar common theme, unfortunately, is that we face a number of challenges. Aging infrastructure, increasing demands on our systems, droughts and floods and fires, regulatory issues. And certainly from a utility perspective in our water, we've taken a number of actions to assist faced as those challenges, infrastructure improvements, addressing water loss, automated meters we heard about. We promote and encourage water use efficiency, recycling wastewater for irrigation. We have a comprehensive watershed management activities. But I also want to just mention two quick things. We are also pursuing a long-term vulnerability study that really looks at the potential impacts on our system to deliver water with various climate change. And secondly, and I think very importantly, is that we've adopted a one water approach that really looks at an integrated planning approach with our three utilities, water and power and sanitation. And this approach really enables us to take a systems approach. So I'm going to conclude there and happy to jump back in. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paula. And next to Hubert Jenner, you are at Green Climate Fund, and your take on this question about water and mitigation from your point of view. Over to you, Hubert.
Thank you very much. I won't introduce the Green Climate Fund. I think you know enough, or you will hear about it enough. And thank you for inviting us to be part of COP26 Water Pavilion presentation today. I think it's a very interesting question because we are all playing catch up with mitigation, which is taking most of climate finance. Emission in the water sector are typically undercounted because they're mostly part of energy production. And I'd like to remind you that energy represents about 50% of the operating cost of a water utility. And if we look in the literature, the World Energy Outlook report found that the amount of energy used in the water sector will more than double over the next 25 years. So there is a lot of mitigation gain to be done. In terms of portfolio, GCF has 19 water projects, is about 10% of our project, and 86% of the money go to adaptation. And the balance going to cross-cutting project, which basically comfort the dominance of adaptation in the water sector. And I like to remember a phrase coined by the World Bank, saying that water is to adaptation what energy is to mitigation. So we have a traditional focus on building people resilience to climate change by climate-proofing water infrastructure, and that's the job. Now, most NDC include water security in their measures. So we have some imbalance in our water portfolio. We are working on it. And with the assistance of accredited entity that develop a project and national designated agency that develop country program, we're trying to address this, because another issue we have is all the water projects are grant funded and there is no private sector funding. So that's something we are a bit concerned. We're publishing a series of sector guides. Some are already published, and water security will be released for comments next week, public comment. And we're addressing both adaptation and mitigation in two paradigm shifting pathways. The first one, which is mostly mitigation, is on water conservation, and the second one, mostly on adaptation, is preservation of water. So basically the path toward responsible and sustainable water management lies through a combination of saving water through water conservation, water efficiency, better water management, and water reuse and recycling. Also educating the public and policymaker. We don't have the solution. We need the country and the accredited entity to volunteer some project, and also allocating scarce water, freshwater resource through proper regulation. So in conclusion, water efficiency leads to improved water management and expected to increase mitigation benefits by maximizing the use of digital tools that are readily available. The cost of sensor has dropped, and we can generate a large number of data, and the increased computer power for data processing and machine learning, which is another word for artificial intelligence. We follow the principle of climate smart utilities developed by the International Water Association, and as the largest user, climate smart agriculture is a very important field. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hubert. And the same question over to Morgan Richmond from Climate Policy Initiative. Good. Thanks.
Thank you. So at Climate Policy Initiative, we seek to support governments, businesses, and financial institutions in mobilizing effective finance towards climate solutions. To that end, and echoing others, I'll first note a number of key barriers we observe in mobilizing finance to projects in the water sector that can reduce emissions and be resilient to climate risks. Those barriers include a lack of transparent and bankable pipelines of projects in the water sector, especially of projects that have rigorously assessed emissions impact and underlying climate risks. Second, water sector project returns often don't compensate investors in developing countries, especially for the additional risk associated with challenging regulatory and policy environments. And then third, there's significant complexity of project due diligence, not surprising, I think, to those in this session, such that many private sector actors, including institutional investors, often avoid financing water and wastewater projects due to cost recovery challenges and the complexity of technical due diligence. So with that in mind, and though those obstacles are significant, the evolution and growth of strategies and activities within the water sector to reduce emissions, targeting especially high potential measures, this has been discussed in this session, provide a real opportunity to build project pipelines that are robust and can provide better project returns for investors. I'll echo others' comments on key steps to mainstream climate considerations, both mitigation and adaptation, into project design of water sector projects, briefly in 3 ways. First, project implementers should ensure that they have sufficient technical capacity to rigorously assess the emissions impacts of projects across the life cycle of the project and to manage any increases in the energy demand associated with new water infrastructure. Second, and I know this has been highlighted by several folks on in the session, during project selection, pipelines should be mapped against the list of priority adaptation and mitigation action in NDCs of the country where implementation is occurring to ensure alignment that can leverage advancement in country level planning in the water sector that's increasingly reflected in NDCs, as has been highlighted by previous speakers. And then finally, across municipal, subnational, and national levels of policymaking, implementers should ensure that emissions plans and goals capture emissions risks and opportunities in the water sector, encourage inclusion, especially as again has been highlighted by many others, of nature-based solutions within efforts to reduce emissions in the water sector. I'll leave it there and thank you.
Thank you. And now my final and second question to the panelists, and I would ask you, given what you've heard and discussed in this session on water mitigation from science to action, what will be your take and the next step to mitigate climate change? If you would mention something, one thing. And I start with the same order as before. Paula, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, the concept about the 50-liter coalition is really an intriguing concept. Certainly provides us the opportunity to further transform water management. San Francisco has been a long supporter of water conservation and water use efficiency. Our residential per capita is 159 liters per person per day. But we recognize that water use efficiency, reducing the use of our resources, is the best management strategy that we can take. And also the opportunity to recycle water and reuse water, the right water for the right use. So we look forward to learning more about the 50-liter coalition and participating in the success of that project and understand the application that it may apply here in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paula. And over to Green Climate Fund and Hubert Jenny. Your take.
Thank you very much. So basically, we start engaging on the back of our water security sector guide with recipient country to develop projects that support this paradigm shift in water security in general and water conservation pathway in particular. So as mentioned by my colleague before, demand management is one of the most cost-effective approach to manage water conservation. In irrigation, the largest consumer, but also industry and municipal water in cities. So we'll be looking, for example, in cities at national non-revenue water program that combine energy and water savings so that we can generate mitigation benefits and contribute to water security. And water reuse is being considered as a new asset class. The second thing is we're looking into decentralized water and wastewater management around circular economy model, so that we can reduce transportation and therefore pumping costs of water and wastewater. And climate resilient wash program will be developed along those lines. Last but not least, resource recovery especially the sludge from the wastewater process to generate biogas. So to conclude, we are working now on a study on climate resilient infrastructure, and we're looking into the greenhouse gas emission from the supply chain. For example, manufacturing concrete and steel to be managed through a future green procurement process to be in place, so that we can give a very good competitive advantage to blue and green infrastructure and ecosystem-based approach over grey traditional infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hubert. And Morgan, you have the final minute on this panel before we do the closing remarks. Over to you, Morgan.
Great, thank you. So in terms of climate policy initiatives, next steps, one element of our work is as Secretariat of the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance, which is a public-private partnership that accelerates well-designed financial instruments targeting climate solutions while also reducing private investors' risks and improving their financial returns. And over 7 cycles over which the lab has operated, instruments endorsed by the lab, including a number targeting climate solutions in the water sector, have mobilized more than $2.5 billion US. The lab, as I mentioned, operates on an annual cycle, and the call for ideas for this year's lab cycle is currently open. So those with ideas for climate finance instruments can apply through December 22nd, and selected ideas will receive guidance and support from high-level leaders from both the public and private sectors over the course of the annual cycle. So just note that in the context of this discussion, we would welcome application of financial instruments targeting climate outcomes in the water sector to apply. And if of interest, more information on the lab and the call for ideas is available at climatefinancelab.org. So thank you.
Thank you. And now, going into the closing remarks, my stopwatch is now 3:31 here in Glasgow, so we are running into overtime. But don't despair, because those of us who follow Premier League games know that overtime you must have the most decisive goals being scored. So stay on for 5 minutes and you will get the outcome of this full session. And the outcome will also be elaborated by Mike Enskat, who is head of section for energy, water and mobility in the Department for Sectoral and Global Programs at Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, GIZ. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very happy to speak some of the closing words, and I hope that I can match your expectations in terms of the Premier League quality of that. But thank you all participants for your valuable contributions. It's a really great to hear all your perspectives. A couple of months ago, GIZ jointly with the Potsdam Institute and Delphi has published a comprehensive study which was entitled Stop Floating, Start Swimming, which looked at the interrelationships between climate change and water. And it's so great to see many of the themes also from that study reappearing here. So I'm really delighted to close this session by shining the spotlight on once again on the potential of water for climate change mitigation. At COP25, it was said that water is for adaptation, what energy is for mitigation. Since then, increasing floods, droughts, and extreme weather events have made the importance of water for climate resilience of communities and ecosystems even more clear. But still, the pivotal role of water for mitigation is often underestimated, and I think we have heard that also in the course of this session. Adaptation and mitigation are complementary strategies in our view. Successful adaptation is only possible by transforming towards a low-emission lifestyle and low-emission economies in line with the Paris Agreement. And mitigation cannot be done without water. First of all, most mitigation measures needed to reach climate neutrality are impacted by water. Water is essential for energy generation, whether in hydropower or as cooling water for power plants. This means we need to think about water holistically. Water must be mainstreamed in all climate mitigation planning processes like energy and agriculture. Second, sustainable water management and healthy freshwater ecosystems hold large, untapped greenhouse gas mitigation potential. Just to name a few examples, as we have seen in the video, contributions from around the world by UNICEF, improving the energy efficiency of water and sanitation utilities and using renewable energy where possible can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here, the water sector has to do its homework in identifying mitigation potential in its own energy consumption. GIZ, as an example, supports the development of an energy performance and carbon emission assessment and monitoring tool, which is called ECAM. It allows water and wastewater utilities to quantify and evaluate their greenhouse gas emissions at a system-wide level. This helps them identify opportunities to reduce their energy consumption and thereby the emissions. Beyond technical solutions, we should, though, also harness the power of nature, restoring and protecting the natural functioning of freshwater ecosystems like wetlands holds large mitigation potentials, as we have also heard in some of the presentations today. In regard to mitigation, peatlands, for example, are powerful carbon sinks. We heard about that, which can store twice as much carbon as the world's forest. In addition, such nature-based solutions can also provide adaptation co-benefits by protecting against flooding, landslides, and droughts. And they also deliver a range of ecosystem co-benefits by safeguarding biodiversity in our freshwater ecosystems. This means we should double down on our efforts to harness the power of freshwater ecosystems and do this alongside the more technical approaches. So in a nutshell, yes, water is for adaptation, what energy is for mitigation, but mitigation cannot be done without water, and water has its own strong mitigation potential. Overall, dire consequences of climate change on communities and ecosystems are abundantly clear. We need to act now with joint efforts in all sectors to take decisive action and accelerate our mitigation efforts. The session today has underscored the important contribution which water can make to mitigate climate change. Without water, climate change cannot be done. Only then we can deliver on the promise of this pavilion, water for climate. Thank you all for this fruitful session and for your great contributions.
And thanks a lot, Mike, to summarize what we have been discussing for 90 plus minutes in 4 minutes. Well done. Now it's 3:36 UTC or GMT, whatever abbreviation for time zones you are most adhered to. Stay tuned, because at 4 p.m. here in Glasgow there will be another session, and this is just day one of the Water Pavilion. We will here for the full 2 weeks. So if you haven't done it before, you can go into www.waterforclimate.net and see you for next session or the other days here at COP. Thank you for attending this session.